this is your host, Julia Napini. I am a clinical and forensic social worker who owns a counseling practice and a consulting business. In this show, we discuss the challenges of being successful in business while maintaining your integrity and staying true to yourself. Join me while I interview other professionals and share insights from life and experience. Let's talk about RingRx, our latest sponsor. RingRx is a high-quality, HIPAA-compliant telephone, text, and fax communications platform. They provide seamless, cost-effective communications for behavioral therapists, medical practices, hospitals, and other healthcare providers. RingRx is designed for modern healthcare environments. They offer customizable features like a phone app, automated patient outreach, voicemail, after-hours call routing, and top-quality desk phones. Try RingRx for free today at ringrx.com. And if you sign up using the code CLIMB, you'll get 15% off your monthly bill forever. Conditions apply. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Compassionate Climb podcast. My guest and I are going to be talking about core beliefs today. So that is going to be our focus. Sabrina Trobak, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, I'm looking forward to this conversation. So tell us about your career climb. I know that you taught for many years and then transitioned to your own holistic counseling practice. So I'd love to hear more about how that played out for you.
Sure. So, ever since kindergarten, I've always wanted to be a teacher. It was, in kindergarten, I was the kindergartner helper, helping kids put their shoes on and stuff. So it just was a natural progression to go into teaching. Towards the end of my teaching career, our administrator left, and I ended up getting kind of put in as the vice principal because I was a learning assistant teacher, so knew all the kids and everything in our school. And they said, you have to be working on your master's to be an administrator. Okay. So I knew I didn't really want to go into administration. I wanted to go into counseling. And they said, as long as you're working on your master's, we don't care what it's in. So I started my master's degree in counseling and psychology. Then they filled the principalship at our school, and I was able to go in as a school counselor. And after my first year of being a school counselor, I went to a workshop on suicide. And at the end of the 3-day workshop, I just thought, this is exactly what I need to do. It just looks at things from a much deeper level. So it's looking at things from a person's core belief, not just the surface. And so the presenter's name was Tony Martin. So I kind of was back and forth with him for about a year, and he agreed to teach me his model of therapy. So I took a giant leap and quit my job as a teaching. And I was a single mom with 2 boys, and just took a leap of faith and started my own private practice in counseling based on this model of therapy. Within about 6 months, I had a full caseload and a waiting list. And that was back in 2010. And I still have a waiting list now. And that's where the book came into play. So I hated having to tell people, sorry, I've got a 1.5 year waiting list. I can't help you. And so I decided, well, maybe I should start writing a book. So I took about 7 years. First 5 years were really just, working and parenting and taking my kids to hockey and all the activities that they had to do. So I would slip in a couple hours here and there. And then I took 1 year and really just focused on getting the book published. And then I was a year with a publisher and got it published, and it came out just over a year ago now. Never, ever in my life did I ever think of being an author in any way, shape, or form. So it was a big challenge for me. And then writing the book was one thing. I thought, okay, well, the book's done. Now we're good. But then there's the whole promoting and marketing piece of it that comes after, which is a huge learning curve for me because as a teacher, I never had to do any marketing. Right. And within 6 months of having my business up and running, I've had a waiting list. So I haven't had to do any marketing at all. So learning the whole social media and putting yourself out there and putting videos on, that's been another learning curve. So there's been a lot of learning. I always say I'm fighting Alzheimer's because I'm always learning something new.
How fascinating. So let's start. We have a lot that we can get into here. So we'll start with this model and this interest in core beliefs that came from, it sounds like, this training focused on suicide. So what was it about this that drew you in and piqued your interest?
So basically, this model of therapy kind of goes back to the foundation is it's always about our core belief. And for a lot of people who've had a lot of trauma, who have a lot of anxiety, they just don't feel very good about themselves, they lack confidence. Often that core belief is feeling not good enough, not important, not valued. And we're constantly trying to prove and support ourselves that that core belief is true. So if my core belief is not good enough, not important, not valued, I'm going to be drawn to things that reinforce and support that core belief. So what we're really doing in this model of therapy is going much deeper and really looking at how did that core belief develop over your lifetime? And what do we need to do to challenge it and change it and make that core belief good enough, important, and valued stronger and stronger and stronger? So we're really dealing with the very deep core of peace rather than, the surface. I say to my clients, I can take 4 or 5 sessions and teach you how to manage your anxiety, but then you have to manage your anxiety for the rest of your life.
Right.
If we figure out why it's there and what's fueling it in the first place, then we can do something different where you're not having to constantly manage your anxiety.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of those that are listening are entrepreneurs and many are in the mental health space. So I'm sure they are familiar with cognitive behavior therapy. Does this differ from that? Is it still kind of in that same ballpark? Is there a different kind of twists and spin on it?
It's a very eclectic model of therapy. We use about 14 different models of therapy. So CBT is a part of it, but also DBT. We use psychoeducational. We use Jung. We use empty chair. There's a variety of different models of therapy that we use for sure, depending on the area that we're working on and the client's needs. Mm-hmm. So we have to be very
versatile.
Yes, good word, versatile for sure.
Okay, interesting. And so if somebody is new to all of this and there's all these different modalities that they are maybe tapping into or accessing, how does one know what the right thing to do at any given moment with any given client?
Well, that really depends on each client for sure, because there isn't a script. It would be really nice if there was a script, but there really isn't. Exactly. And so we're constantly having to kind of reevaluate. I go into every session with a plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G, so that no matter what happens, I've got a bit of a backup plan on how we can sort through and figure out wherever we need to go. So you have to be able to really kind of pivot whenever needed for sure. And sometimes you can start on the right track. I always say I never try to convince my clients of anything. As soon as I'm trying to convince them, I stop. What we need to do is find another way to enter. There's always an open door or an open window or chimney or attic, whatever it might be. And so we just have to keep moving around and try to find that entrance way where they're able to kind of see and they're willing to go in without being forced or pushed. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that takes a few different attempts for sure.
So what would you say for clients that are maybe not as open to this model in the beginning? So I know just historically, the cognitive models were really supported by insurance companies because they're evidence-based and there is that ability to kind of provide some relief in the short term while clients are doing more of that long-term work. But it doesn't necessarily work for everyone. And for some people, they need more of that kind of action-oriented or really taking something concrete and bringing it into their daily life. So you had mentioned DBT as well. But what are some of the techniques that you use if someone is not really as open to this as you'd like them to be?
They have to be somewhat open to contact me. So that a lot of people that aren't open, I never hear from, so I don't have to worry about them too much. Everyone who contacts me is at least looking for something. And generally what I do is I go through right in the very first session and I kind of explain the model of therapy, what I'm doing, why I'm doing what I'm doing. We talk about, us kind of like being a bucket. And as we go through life, we get all these things that get dumped into our bucket and our bucket gets fuller and fuller and fuller. And really what we're doing is going through and taking things out of our bucket and sorting through it. As we take things out of our bucket, we're learning how to take things out of our bucket because life happens. There's always going to be things coming in, but learning how to take it out. So we do different things to help them kind of make a personal connection where they kind of go, oh, okay, that makes sense to me. And they kind of buy into the process.
Okay.
Once they get that far, then we do start with the very basics, because we do need to give people some basic skills and coping strategies to manage things as we're going in through and dealing with things. As we're looking at that core belief, we're going back and digging up a whole bunch of stuff. And for a lot of clients, that's a lot of trauma. So they need to have some really good strategies and understanding of themselves in place to be able to manage doing that. So we spend, I can easily spend 4, 5, 6 sessions talking with clients about anxiety and how it's connected to that core belief, and the cortisol and the adrenaline that gets dumped into your body, and how you're controlling your own anxiety with your thoughts. So many of my clients feel like anxiety is this cloud that kind of overcomes them and they have no control out of it. Once they realize they're creating it with their own thoughts, they feel more empowered to be able to manage it. So we spend a lot of time getting a much deeper understanding of anxiety, almost from a science base, and then look at strategies that work and getting better at identifying our anxiety as it gets higher and higher and higher. A lot of my clients, they know what their anxiety looks like when it's really, really high, but they don't necessarily know what it looks like when it's a 2 or a 3 out of 4, which means I'm not doing anything about my anxiety until it's really, really high. Right. Which then I've got so much cortisol in my brain, it's hard for me to use logic and reason. And even if I do, I got a lot of work to bring it back down. So we look at, what does your anxiety look like at a 1, at a 2, and at a 3? Become more aware of the physical symptoms, the behavioral symptoms, the thought patterns that are happening at those different levels, and using those as cues to bring your anxiety down and apply strategies before you get to that really high level. So we spend a lot of time really creating a foundation where they're feeling much more confident in going through and sorting through the core belief stuff and the past trauma and the past experiences.
Mm-hmm. So I would assume that you are obviously doing a good job on your website and on social media to really identify who your ideal client is. If you're finding that the majority of people that are coming to you are already open and receptive for the most part, sounds like you do kind of a screening process, you review everything in the assessment phase, and then you're kind of continually assessing their receptiveness to this model. So what would you say, once you identify with someone collaboratively what their core belief is, and what would you say are kind of overarching themes or techniques or things that work with most people to really help them to avoid that core belief kind of getting in the way, contributing to that anxiety and affecting their behavior?
I don't think it's even so much to avoid it. It's just accepting it and understanding it. When that core belief comes up and I feel like, oh, I don't feel good enough. It's like, okay, that's what I'm feeling right now. So what do I need to do to manage it? What do I need to do to challenge it so I feel more confident? We talk about anxiety as being about lack of belief in yourself that you can handle something. So a lot of people will think anxiety is about the trigger. They'll say I have anxiety of heights. Well, if it was true and it was about heights, then every single person on the face of the earth would have anxiety of heights, but not everyone does. Sure. So it's not about heights. Anxiety is about my belief in my ability to handle something. Mm-hmm. So if I believe I can handle heights, I'm not going to have anxiety. If I believe I can't handle heights, I'm going to have more anxiety. So we're really looking at it from that perspective of, okay, you've got anxiety there. Okay. So that means you're struggling with your belief in your ability to handle this. So what are some strategies we can put in place? What are some things we can do to help you feel more confident in your ability to handle that? You feel more confident, the anxiety is going to go down. Anxiety and confidence are almost like on a teeter-totter with each other.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it, and not necessarily a way that I have before. So that's really helpful. So as you are in this process of developing this business, which is in the same realm as what you were doing, still a helping profession, but obviously very different once you went back to school, what was that process of starting your practice like, and making that decision to have it be holistic in nature?
Again, I kind of fell on the model, and the model is a holistic model. We're looking at mind, body, emotion, spirits. We're looking at a person's entire life experiences. So when we're talking about holistic, that's the kind of approach we're talking about, is the person as a whole. And that just was the model that I kind of stumbled on when I went to that 3-day workshop. Um, I was in Fort Nelson, BC, Canada, and was separated from my partner and had 2 young kids and couldn't manage to start my own business on my own and financially survive. So we, as a family, my ex agreed as well to move back to Fort St. John, which is where my parents were. And so we all kind of moved in 2 separate homes back to Fort St. John. And I lived with my parents, with my boys, and got my company up and running. And once it was about a year in, I was doing well and was able to get my own place again, and we kind of moved forward. But it was scary for sure, but it's just one step at a time. You just take one little piece at a time and work on that. Once that one's done, then you figure out what the next piece is.
So it doesn't sound like marketing was really something that you had to focus on until the book came along. Is that right? So how were people primarily finding you, and where were those referrals predominantly coming from?
Well, I live in a very small town, and I mean, it's 20,000, so it's not super, super small, but it's small enough for sure. And I grew up in Fort St. John. My dad and my mom lived here the vast majority of my life. So I knew a lot of people already that were in Fort St. John. There definitely was a need. There's not a lot of counselors here to begin with. So anyone opens up a counseling agency, it doesn't take very long, and you've got people kind of knocking at your door. So I definitely did some free workshops in the community to kind of put myself out there, and, just kind of promoted myself organically as best as I could. But within 6 months, I didn't have to worry about it anymore. And in fact, would back away when people would say, "Oh, do you want to advertise?" I'd be like, "No, I'm good. I don't want to advertise."
Wow, that must have been such an incredible feeling for you, with everything that contributed to you getting to that point and achieving success so fast. So you started to speak on kind of how the book came about. So for those that maybe weren't able to access those services with you, you wanted them to be able to have something that they could use as a guide on their own?
Right. So it's a handbook. So basically, you're reading a little bit of information, and then you're applying the information to your own personal experiences. So it's got a lot of charts and diagrams and pictures in it where you're filling out information and applying it to your own life experiences. Again, how do you write a book for anxiety, for people with anxiety who don't get anxiety when they read? I was a learning assistant teacher for 20 years, so I know a lot of people with anxiety struggled with reading. So even just developing the book in a way that was more comfortable or safe for people with anxiety was a challenge. There's very few pages in my book that are too full spread of full text. It's
Okay.
almost every single spread is got a diagram, a chart, a picture, something in it to break it up. It's written into very small chunks, so you can read 2 or 3 paragraphs and you're done a section of it. So I broke it into really small parts. It's written in very layman languages, so it's easy to understand, as a way to try to provide for people who struggle with, they can't get in because there's waiting lists, they can't afford counseling, or they're maybe a bit intimidated, a bit unsure about taking that first step and actually going into an office or having a face-to-face conversation with someone. So this gives them a bit more privacy and being able to address some of their issues more personally without anyone else even really having to know.
So it's something that somebody could utilize on their own without the assistance of a therapist, or is it recommended to have a therapist guide them through that process?
No, it is for individuals to just read through and work through it. It goes through, talks about your core belief, helps you kind of figure out how your core belief developed over the years, talks significantly about anxiety, about strategies, about emotions. Part of what feeds significantly into that core belief, not good enough, not important, not valued, is we are not good at feeling our emotions. We just push them down and suppress them. Well, that means we're getting fuller and fuller and fuller and fuller with emotions. So it gets harder and harder to cope with even just daily life. And so if you're holding in a lot of emotion, the chances that core belief, not good enough, not important, not valued, is going to be more significant as well. So it's looking at, what are the emotions? How do we actually get a better understanding of emotions? What do emotions feel like physically in my body? How do I get better at being able to acknowledge and sort through my emotions rather than suppressing them?
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. So I'm thinking of all of your experience teaching and then this training and then working with clients and now writing this book. What would you say to those that are listening are some of the key things that we can all do? I mean, that was a great foundation, what you just shared. So much of it is awareness, recognizing maybe when we are suppressing some of our emotion, finding healthy ways to obviously manage that, and then really getting at the heart of these core beliefs. But what are some things that anybody can do to start to experience some relief quickly?
I think one of the basic things that I talk with my clients about is breathing. So I think we all know, yeah, breathe, we've heard it for a long time, but a lot of people just kind of brush it by the wayside.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens when we have anxiety is a chemical called cortisol gets dumped into our brain. Cortisol stops us from being able to think. We cannot use logic and reason, understand consequences, connect to emotion, memory. They're all significantly impacted. There's research that shows that breathing actually stops that cortisol from being dumped into our brain. So just taking some good deep breaths when you are feeling anxious can be really helpful. But even just breathing more regularly throughout the day, where you're just taking some breaths, can be really, really important. The other thing I think is, for a lot of people who have anxiety, we're always trying to keep up with our brain, where what we need to do is actually say, no, brain, stop, slow down. You're going to go at my pace. Because the faster we try to keep up with our brain, the faster our brain just keeps going anyways. Mm-hmm. So we need to reframe our thinking where we're actually stopping, taking more breaks. We can be much more productive if we actually take breaks and slow down than if we just try to keep up with our brain, because we just end up going in 80 million different directions when really we only need to go in 4.
So I've heard the concept of slowing down to kind of speed up and be more efficient, but have never really heard of it as us trying to keep up with our brain, as opposed to telling our brain, you're going to go at my speed. So that's an interesting spin on it. So I can see for someone that maybe has not had some of this exposure before, this might be a really new concept to them, especially somebody who's maybe been using some mechanisms to numb emotion or maybe suppressing and not even realizing it. Do you find that there are some clients that really struggle with this kind of exposure to this for the first time? Or do you find that for the most part, people can really make that connection and develop a level of understanding pretty quickly?
Understanding and applying are two very different things. So a lot of them understand it and get it, but almost all of them struggle with the application of it. If you spent your entire life suppressing and pushing down emotions, and now Sabrina comes along and says, we're not going to do that anymore. Yeah, we don't go willingly. It takes a lot of real conscious thought and practice and little tiny steps at a time. So we start by even just talking about, what does sad feel like in your body? A lot of people don't realize that emotions are something we feel physiologically in our body. We have an emotion. What happens is we have a thought that creates a chemical reaction that we then feel physiologically in our body. If I'm not aware what it feels like, I'm not going to be able to acknowledge it and feel it and let it out. So we even just talk what does your head feel like? We just go through the whole body. What does your body feel like when you feel sad, when you feel angry, when you feel anxious? Become more comfortable identifying and being aware of what those physically feel like, then we can start to feel that emotion.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. What are some of the things that you suggest to people if maybe they're in tune with those emotions for the first time in a long time and their concern is that it's going to become overwhelming or unmanageable?
And it does feel like that for sure. But I always compare it to a wave. Waves can get pretty big and pretty overwhelming, but eventually they always subside. And that's the same with emotion. So if we try to fight a wave and push against it, we're probably going to end up on our butt. We're not going to win to it. So it's harder when we try to resist that wave. If we learn how to just ride it, yeah, it can be really, really scary, but it will subside. You will come down on the other side. And I always say to people, I think most people, men and women, have had a good cry from time to time, and we feel better after. And so it's important to remember that yeah, in the moment, does not feel good. But afterwards, it does feel a lot better. There's often a huge sense of relief just to let it out. But the only way you get there is you got to go through it. You can't jump over it.
Yeah, that's a really helpful reminder for all of us. So I am really curious. You talked a little bit about the process of writing the book. So you said that was 7 years?
Yeah.
So tell us more. If there's anybody listening that has ever considered writing a book or maybe finds themselves in this position where they had never really anticipated that that would be something that would be on their resume, what are some takeaways for you looking back on that experience? Suggestions that you would give to people or kind of the reality of what that process is like?
I think one of the big things is be kind to yourself. uh, I had no idea what I was doing. I've got in my closet, I have all my drafts, and I think there's 17 different drafts of my book. So it was just a process where I would just keep adding and changing and adding and changing and figure out what I like. And when I look at the first draft compared to the final draft, it's almost a completely different book. When I first started, it wasn't going to be a handbook. About halfway through, I was like, you know what? If I actually put activities in here where people could apply this information, they'd probably get a lot more out of it. And so it definitely progressed and changed as I continued to work on it. So you just need to be kind, be open. If your brain goes in a different direction, try it. If it works, great. If it doesn't, well, go back to the last draft and try it again. And we don't need to rush it. It just takes time.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the marketing avenues that you have found to be the most successful? So, as somebody who guides individuals on that process, I know that it's really about finding something that is kind of in alignment with you, that you can show up as yourself consistently, and that can look very different for different people. What have you found to be the most successful?
It's still a journey. I don't know if I could say the most successful other than in person. I guess would be the most successful for me so far. So I definitely did a lot of farmers markets in my area, just around Fort St. John. I offer, and I have offered workshops for my community even before, and now I do that and I sell my book at it as well. So in person is significant. I've done a lot of wellness expos, health and wellness expos. I'm actually going on a tour here in October. I'm going to be doing a bunch of them and be all kind of around Western Canada. Those are often really good because it's just more personal. You can kind of connect with people and those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on all the social media platforms. Instagram and Facebook are the main ones. I've just started TikTok. That was kind of my last step out of your comfort zone and try something new. The podcasts, I'm just kind of starting to do more and more podcasts, but, like you're in Massachusetts. So it's nice to be able to just provide some information to other people in other areas that isn't costing me thousands of dollars to fly to Massachusetts and stay in a hotel and all those kind of things. So I think the podcasts are going to be a good marketing tool, but
Definitely.
like I said, this is the third or fourth one I've done. So
Yeah,
I
so
don't know yet. Yeah,
oh, that's wonderful. I mean, it really does widen the reach, but that's also such a good reminder for all of us. And I would agree. The more we've done in the community, so I own a group counseling practice, and the more relationships that we've established, I feel like you may not necessarily feel the effects of that instantaneously, but you're planting seeds and it definitely
right.
comes back for sure. And it's a lot more of that reciprocity. So, not to say that you can't do that with all of these other avenues, but I think you have to be really conscientious in your messaging. And again, you have to be consistent and stick with it. And we don't necessarily always know what that return is going to be right away. And if we're looking for a
Exactly.
really quick fix, then a lot of times
Mm,
we're going to be disappointed.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think you have to put yourself out there. If you kind of sit back and wait for people to come to you, probably not going to be overly successful. You got to get out there and pound the pavement and get into the communities. I went to our local college and offered to do workshops there. And, I work right now I work with the city of Fort St. John and provide free workshops for the community that way. And, like I grew up, my dad was very involved with the community, was a big advocate for volunteering. So it's just kind of a natural part of me. So I want to give back to my community as well. And if I get marketing out of it, then that's an added bonus for sure.
True. Well, it's such a
Yeah,
great way to blend both of the worlds. I mean, you have this
absolutely.
modality that you've seen success with, and you still have the natural teaching instinct, and you're able to use those skills as well. So that's
For
great.
sure.
So where can everybody listening find you on social media? And we'll make sure to include the link to your website.
Sure. So my website is trobakholistic.org. I'm on Instagram at NGE, so that's for not good enough, NGE_Trobak. I am on Facebook on Trobak Holistic Counseling. I am on TikTok at NGE_core_belief.
Wonderful. All right. Well, I'm definitely going to be checking those out. So what would one final thought that you want to leave the listeners with today be?
You're never stuck. You can always take that one little step and move forward. Don't worry about giant leaps. Just what's one little thing you can do today. It doesn't have to be a major thing, even if it's having an extra half a glass of water so that you're getting a bit more water, or you walk to the mailbox instead of stopping on the way in your vehicle and picking it up, or searching up YouTube videos or whatever it might be on mental health and learning something new. Just one little step at a time leads to pretty significant growth for sure.
I love that. Thank you so much for all that you're doing and for taking the time to be on the show today. Best of luck with the promotion of your book and this Wellness Expo tour.
Thank you very much. It was nice chatting with you for sure.
If you like what you're hearing, please rate and review. This will help others find us and benefit as well. The Compassionate Climb podcast represents the opinions of Julia Napini and her guests. The information provided is intended for educational purposes only and should not be taken as legal advice. If that is what you are seeking, please consult an attorney.